Avatar is real. Hands up if you've seen the movie. Yeah. Oh, great. Awesome. I said that at another conference, and I think most people hadn't seen the movie, and I'm like, okay, you're not going to get my anecdote now. Totally lost the plot. Right. So not so much the tall blue people and, all the romance and all of that. Well, romance is good, but this concept that the planet is interconnected. So in James Cameron's movie of this faraway world, the people there, the Na'vi, were actually able to communicate with animals and plants and trees, and the trees were actually able to hold their history. And everything was interconnected, and at night everything would glow. I mean, it's a beautiful movie if you haven't seen it. But what was interesting about what the Na'vi were doing is how they viewed nature was that actually they were part of it. It wasn't something that was kind of separate or over there, it was that they were interconnected with it. Yeah, and actually working in a system that was regenerative, where you wouldn't take any more out of a system than what the system could handle. So what they're discovering now is, and there's been so many interesting breakthroughs probably in the last 20 odd years, so some of the stuff that James Cameron was looking at was incredibly cutting edge, but this idea that bacteria could actually communicate. So there's something called quorum sensing. You guys heard of quorum sensing? No? Doctors in the house, good. So quorum sensing, go and have a look. What they're saying, quorum sensing is the ability for bacteria to communicate with each other. So in the deep sea, like these fish with the lights that glow, it's actually bacteria. And the fish was sending signals to those bacteria. The bacteria get to a certain number and they turn each other on or off. What they're seeing now in medicine is that this could be the new antibiotics. That bacteria, when they get to certain population levels, send out chemical signals to switch on or switch off. So virulence can be switched on or switched off, which is very, very, very exciting. And so I just wanted to share a little story about a friend of mine. Have you guys heard of the tardigrade? The water bear or the water piglet? They're about 2 microns in size. I get really, really excited when I find one of these in the microscope, and I'll run down the corridor and tell everybody in the house that I found a tardigrade. Right, these things, yeah, we get excited about these little things. All right, so these things can exist. Well, we don't want to be advertising anything else on whatever it is, technology. Right, so these things can exist to below 270 degrees. So absolute zero. They can survive nearly to boiling. They can survive to 10,000 times the amount of radiation that we can exist in. We find them in the Antarctic. We find them at the bottom of the deep sea channels when you've got those big hot, little, what are they called? Those things, yeah. We find tardigrades there. We find them, they discovered them on some moss that had come out of Scott Base. And the moss was like 120 years old. It was in a museum. And they added some water to this moss, and the tardigrades sprung to life. They could desiccate their bodies to 3% of their water and stay as cryogenesis. Yep, so they basically have all of these, concepts that we can barely kind of get our heads around, yet this one organism's able to do it. So they thought, well, if it can survive all of these environments, how about we send it into outer space? So they did, and when they came back, these things were still alive. Right? So we're starting to see that there's stuff going on in the soil that we have just so little understanding about. And really, it could be holding the secrets to human health, cancer, whatever else is going on for us, those secrets really are in the soil. So I'd like to take you back on a journey. So let's just go back, 420 million years or something. So imagine a time before there were plants. So what do you think the soil would look like? What would planet Earth look like before plants were there? Yeah, sand, silt and clay, right? Because it's the plants that are actually building that soil. So the first inhabitants that came up, and maybe they were coming up for these minerals, were the fungi. So if we look at these are fungal formations. That there is a human being just in relationship, so you can see how big these things were. Right? So these things, they don't photosynthesize, all right? They didn't need to capture sunlight energy. They had the ability to etch out those minerals. Right? So where were the plants around this time? So 400 million years, where were the plants? They were out in the sea. Yeah. So what happened? Why did plants end up coming up into the land, do you think? Yeah, I'd say sea level changes, right? So what you've got is a fungus has the ability to get hold of all of these minerals, huge ability to etch away with acids and get hold of minerals, and then you have plants that have the ability to photosynthesize. And these guys join together in one of the most wondrous symbiotic relationships that's enabled us to now live on this planet. All right, so this relationship, what's the name? Do you guys know what the name of that particular fungus is? Mycorrhizal fungi, all right? It's given us that ability to then, for plants, to be able to access minerals. And what they do then is you have sunlight, energy shining down onto the plants, and the plants then through this process of photosynthesis, they take in carbon dioxide, water, and turn that then into sugar and oxygen. What does that sugar then turn into in the plant? Starch, cellulose, lignin, protein, amino acids, everything that plant is then built from starts as these building blocks of sugar, which then go on to feed your sheep or your cattle. But this process of photosynthesis is absolutely essential. Now, plants are photosynthesizing away, but it's how well are those plants photosynthesizing. So you could have a plant that looks green, and you go, it's doing all right. But actually, the photosynthetic rate might not be very high on that plant, right? And that has an impact on nutrition. That has an impact on quality. So what the plant then does is it sends those sugars down, and up to 60% of the sugar that it captures from sunlight energy, it sends it down the plant, and it leaks out through the roots. So scientists have known this since the late 1800s, that there were sugars leaking out the roots, and they were like, silly plants, leaking all over the place. So up to 60% of those hard-earned sugars, those plants are then leaking out their roots. So why do they do that? Yeah, because that's how they're building soil, and that's what they're doing. So it's kind of like, if you think, we have legs, but also we have the ability to get on the phone and say, you know what, I feel like pizza tonight. And you can make a call, and someone brings you a pizza. And it's kind of what the plant's doing. So that sugar is basically the currency of the planet. They're sending those sugars out to say, hey, you know what, I really feel like I need Italian or zinc or whatever that plant needs right now, but it's how the plant actually signals to get the nutrients or the metabolites that it needs. So here is our mycorrhizae. So mycorrhizae literally translate, myco means fungus, rhizo means root. So 90% of our plants have this relationship. It's incredibly important. And so if you imagine this is the root here, these here are your mycorrhizae. They can increase the surface area that a plant can then access water and nutrients by 10,000 times in a corn plant, for instance. All right, so massive surface area. So what it does then is it sends those sugars or carbon then out into that soil system to do what? Why is it sending those carbons out there? I'm telling you the story. Yeah, to feed those microbes. I'll show you the microbes. Right, so if you can imagine, hopefully this works. Oh, yay, we love when technology works. All right, so this would be a typical view of looking at some of these soils. So what we have in here are what are these large ones whipping around? No, anyone know? So these are your ciliates, these are the protozoas, all right? What's all of the little stuff in the background? Bacteria, right? And then you see there's some smaller ones that are kind of rolling. Those are flagellates, and if you zoomed in on them, they kind of look like sperm. Then we've got these longer ones, so your bacillus, your long chains. And here is the beginning of humus formation. So those biologies getting together and they're starting to form humus or glomalin. So the sticky, dark brown stuff, the stuff that New Zealanders have lots of and you guys don't have so much of. All right? But it's a biological process. So what we're seeing in Western Australia is there's been, because of your brittle landscape, because you have very old, very, very ancient soils and not a lot of mineralisation, and we're not getting these processes really kick-started. But we can do it. So then that carbon's then coming out to feed those microbes. Oh, and I've got another one to show you. This is really exciting. This one. So you can see this is a nematode. So often when we think about nematodes, because I know you do that all the time, all right, so where do you think 95% of research in nematodes goes into? What are we going to look at? How do we do what? Kill it. Die. So most of the research that we ever look at, and when we're talking about microorganisms, is what kind of disease is it and how does I kill it? The same with weeds. What kind of weeds do we have and what kind of herbicides are going to kill it the best? All right, so it's like a war out there. No wonder people are stressed out. Get up in the morning and go, oh, who am I going to kill today? All right, so instead of that, we're looking at some of these. If we build soil health, so for instance, this is a fungus here. This fungus has actually oozed out a glue that attracts the nematode, so it smells like a root that's being damaged. The nematode comes along and it gets stuck to it. Then it can't move, it can't feed, and then it dies, and then the fungus absorbs the nutrients from it. Really, really cool. You guys have this in Western Australia in your soils. There's some other ones that make like a loop, and when the nematode comes along and swims through it, the loop suddenly shuts and closes on that nematode, and they're not going anywhere. All right, and then they will absorb that nutrient. Awesome stuff. And what we've seen is if we just start to build our soil health, these organisms start to appear in the system. So the plant's sending out those sugars to all the different biology, and then the biology's bringing it back. Pizza, Italian, anything that you want. But in particular, phosphate, and in particular, zinc. So when you apply superphosphate, what do you see that happens with your nutrients in the plant? What nutrient falls out the minute that we apply superphosphate to wheat? No? Zinc, all right? 0, nil, nada. We have no zinc in those wheat plants anymore the minute we apply high-soluble phosphate. And part of that story is antagonism, so nutrients antagonizing against each other, but part of the story is mycorrhizae switch off instantly. And mycorrhizae is the main way that we're getting zinc up into the plant. What was Carole talking about? Do we need zinc? Yes. All right, so we can keep walking around trying to fortify our breads, or actually we could get mycorrhizae really working. Things like nitrogen. So it always amazes me that we're out there applying nitrogen when, look at this. It's everywhere. It's a biological process to then get that into the plant. And the most common organism in soil, a free-living one in healthy soils, is a free-living nitrogen fixer. But the minute we start disrupting those soils and degrading the soil quality, we lose our nitrogen fixers. The moment you start applying soluble nitrogen, the microbes go, oh, you didn't need me. Okay, thanks. And they leave. All right, so we can look at how do we get these guys back into the system. So basically what we've done is we've blown that microbial bridge. So Carole talked about it a little bit, but we've got this incredibly important microbial community. You are more of a bacteria than you are a human being. Right? And often comes to me, you know, when you're late at night, the house is quiet and you think, I really need a bag of chips. Just a couple of squares of chocolate. Just a couple. It's not me, all right? It's the microbes. Those microbes are telling me what to do. And you know, when you wake up some mornings and the black dog's kind of hanging around and you're feeling really flat, it's your microbes, all right? So soil microbes are having more determination on your feeling, on how you talk to your kids. You're like, oh, I apologize for my microbes. They're really acting up today. So we've blown that microbial bridge. So we've done it in ourselves. So it could be from antibiotics, heavy metals, pesticides, whatever we're ingesting has affected our bodies. And they're seeing this relationship from microbiology and human health is massive. I mean, they're starting, it's now hard to find a disease that's not related to your gut microbes now, instead of the other way around. So the same research is happening in soils. We need these soils for plant nutrition, plant health. All right, we've got a fungal disease in the plant. Well, what's happening with your microbiology? We've got pest problems. We've got frost. Well, the frost is all about microbiology and having complete proteins instead of, you know, free nitrogen in the system. There's actually microbiology that will protect plants from frost. All right, so we need to start look at what is that role of microbiology. So we've blown our microbial bridge. So I'm just going to share a story about how I blew my microbial bridge. So when I was 10 years old, my father thought we should move from our small lifestyle block in New Zealand to Hong Kong. So I left my horse and our goats and all our livestock behind, and we moved to the biggest, most bustling city in the world, which at the time, I tell you, was a culture shock. And I grew to love it. So when I was 15, I was doing well as a long-distance runner. I was doing well academically. Things were going pretty good. And I was hospitalized for some reason. I ended up in the hospital for 2 days, and they thought I had meningitis. So my neck froze up. I had, you know, huge temperatures. Wasn't feeling so flash. Anyway, they gave me a lumbar puncture, which in hindsight was probably the worst thing that they could have done. So what it ended up being was Paraquat poisoning. So that Paraquat sits in your spinal fluid. So I don't know if, you know, Paraquat's used quite a lot to suicide in third world countries because there's no antidote, so it gets into your spinal fluid. So for the next 15 years, it absolutely changed my life. And at the time, people just thought I was being a teenager. I was disgusting, because teenagers are disgusting. I stopped being interested in school. I stopped running. My grades went from, A's to C's. And I just wasn't interested, I had headaches, I had migraines, and my neck was frozen. So probably about 5-10 years later, I went and had x-rays, and they said, we think your neck's fused, because I couldn't move my neck more than that. And then I met a guy when I was 30 who did... he said, you have Paraquat poisoning. We did hyperbaric chambers, intravenous vitamin C, and flushed that Paraquat out of the system. And suddenly I had full neck mobility. My headaches started to improve. My life changed just out of sight. But the reason that I'm sharing this story is that we walk around thinking that the world and all these things that are going on with us are somehow separate. Like nature's like, oh, hello, nature, over there. We're running around as individuals instead of going, actually, there's all these things that have interactions. So if you look at the amount of chemicals now in the system, so imagine, we have nearly 1 million words in the English language, yet we have 50,000 words for chemicals. And every 2.6 seconds, they synthesize another chemical. So if you think that, and that, oh, there's a new one. And that, oh, another one, awesome. And we don't know what they do, and we don't know what the consequences are. And then when we figure it out, we go, oh, whoops, we'll put that one back in the bag. DDT, you can go back in there. Yeah, those little nano things that they're recalling at the moment. We're putting stuff out there in the environment that we have so little understanding about what those consequences could be. So I really think we need to be looking at it in terms of how do we replicate what's happening in nature? Because I think the closer we get to some of these nature's rules is where things really work. It's the further that we get from that. So if we look at how we approach a lot of practices in modern agriculture, we have a problem like, what was I talking about killing before? Nematodes. Yeah, so let's say we got root knot nematodes and we go, oh, awesome, we better kill it. So we're going to solve it. We'll find some kind of solution. We'll put some kind of nematicide out there. But unfortunately, that nematicide then causes another problem further down the track. And we do that on, and we're doing that with human health. So what I want you to do, just to engage with me for a minute, is for those of you who either yourself or someone close to you who's had cancer, I'd like you to stand up. Right. Those of you, stay standing. If someone close to you or yourself has an autoimmune disorder, stand up. If those of you or someone close to you has a learning disorder, stand up. Get all of them? What else, Carole? What else would we like to ask? Autism, yeah. I put that into the learning category, but yeah, autism. All right. Look around the room. All right. And it's really great to see that some people are sitting down, but yeah, thank you, sit down. What we're seeing is an unattended consequence of our modern society, we have a problem, let's fix it. Oh, whoopsie, we have another problem, let's fix it, and we run around chasing our tails. A really good example of this actually is at the end of the 18th century, we had huge volumes of people moving into the city. So they moved away from rural communities. They were looking for the bright lights and the money, right? And what happened at the time is it was getting harder and harder to get fresh food because they didn't have refrigeration at this time. So one thing they couldn't get hold of was good quality milk because it would sour and go rancid. So some geniuses in New York, I'm not saying they're men or anything. I'm not. Not beating up on men, you guys are awesome. All right, decided that they had this waste from making whiskey, right? So they had whiskey sludge being made in the cities, and they thought, hey, how about we bring the cows into the cities and then they could eat the whiskey sludge? Problem solved, marvellous. So these great big indoor complexes in the middle of New York, and on average, those cows would live for a year, on average. But people could suddenly get raw milk. It was fantastic, except the raw milk was so full of pus. Those cows were so sick. So there's no, can you imagine? No sunlight, being fed whiskey sludge, all that ammonia, and great. So people, suddenly had raw milk. Problem solved. Unfortunately, Childhood deaths went up by 25% during that period of time. So the babies were being fed this milk and dying. And luckily, Louis Pasteur came along and said, awesome, I have the solution for you. We can pasteurize milk. All right? And so now we have this, irrational fear in Australia around raw milk because we did irrational things to animals and ended up with a product that was dangerous. It's not what we're dealing with now. So this is the problem, solution, vicious circle that we're in. So how I see regenerative agriculture, which is what I'm involved in, is we look at what's the structural issue behind a problem. If we've got something that's not working, what's lying underneath? So it's asking those why questions. Why do we have pests, weeds, and disease? Why do we have frost? Why do I have no organic matter? Yep, how can we build it? And then we spend a lot of our time looking at how do we make things work and focusing on the fun stuff. So the guys that I work with are really happy people, like it's a really fun industry to be working in. And I'm probably preaching to the converted in this room, but it's a good space to be in. So I'm just going to talk about one of my clients. So these guys are the largest nursery in New Zealand. They produce between 3.5 to 5 million rootstock for the viticulture industry in New Zealand, and they do kiwi fruit and avocados. They're doing some cool stuff. So over the last 4 years, we've really looked at, let's streamline that operation. How do we get it to be? So what they have is a 1,000-year sustainability vision. Will this be sustainable in 1,000 years? Is this really going to be able to maintain itself for a long time? So looking at the use of copper, or the organo type chemicals are now out of the system. Looking at, why is it that we do things? So what we do is we sit down and have meetings and we ask that why question at least 6 times. So one of the practices that they had was they'd put black plastic out on the ground. You see the black plastic? And that was great because the black plastic would warm the soils up so they'd get those roots growing quicker earlier in the season. Then it would get too hot, so they have to come along and paint it white. All right? And then there's no water getting through, so then we have to put irrigation tape underneath as well. All right? It was costing them a fortune. So, and they were having some root diseases, so they thought, well, how about we roll out some mulch and just try mulching? Now you think mulching hippies, we've got 3.5, 5 million rootstock out there. How are we going to put all that mulch out? So we did barley straw, small round bales of barley straw, rolled them down the rows. And in the first year, we had some disasters because the barley straw sprouted, so we ended up with more weeds. Anyway, year 2, so they didn't give up on it. They went, all right, we're going to solve this. Rolled that barley straw out. Okay, we had more microbiology. We didn't need the ticker tape. We didn't need the irrigation tape. We didn't need the black plastic. The disease levels went down and worms started coming back into the system, so that rootstock became incredibly healthy. These guys now sell their rootstock guaranteed to have a certain level of mycorrhizal colonization. So they're training the people that they sell it to. Mycorrhizae is really important for vines. It saved them significant amounts of money, and yet they're building all of this, and suddenly they didn't have a waste. From just going, why is it that we were doing something? It just becomes a standard practice, and then you accept it. And I bet you can do this on lots of practices on the farm and go, why do we do it? Why do we do it? Oh, because Granddad did it. Why did he do it? Have you heard that story about cooking the piece of beef with chopping the ends off? Yeah, anyway, I won't go there. Okay, so there's things that we do and we just sort of take it for granted because it's how we've always done it. So what I find is instead of looking for solutions, like how do we solve these problems, by actually addressing the structural issue, we dissolve it. So we end up not having that problem in the system at all because it's no longer relevant. We're not talking about plastic waste anymore because it's not there. We're not talking about what kind of pesticides do we need because we have nutrition in there. Or we're not having to, say, put sprinklers out for frost because we don't have frost anymore. So many of the guys that I work with have been surveyed and found to be some of the most profitable enterprises, the ones in New Zealand, most profitable vineyards in the North Island of New Zealand because we've just got rid of all that excess garbage. We've just really honed that efficiency by working with nature and looking at how do we get natural systems working. So if we look at the average mineral content in food, so you would have seen this before. Okay, so this is World Health Organization data. You can go and look on their website for Australia, for New Zealand, for different types of food. You can go and find it for beef or lamb. And what we see across the board is that nutrition is being lost out of the system. And it doesn't matter what it is. So where's the nutrition gone? Gosh, we're putting on a lot of fertilizers. Where's the nutrition gone? Yeah, some of it's been washed away. We've blown this microbial bridge, okay? So who feeds the plant and who feeds us is your microbes and all the practices that we're using. So if that's cultivation, if it's herbicide, if it's pesticides, if it's fungicides, if it's high soluble N and P, and all of these practices that are common practices, all have a negative impact on microbiology to varying extents. And what we've lost then is this pathway. So we're basically treating plants like they are in a hydroponic environment. I know what's good for you, you just need NPK. Let alone all of the other stuff that the body needs. I mean, your hair agronomists say you only need 16 elements to grow a plant. You go, hello, not a plant. All right, we need 60 elements what would you say? Yeah. Minimum for humans. And yet we're not thinking about that in terms of what we're doing with our crops. So plants are what are providing those secondary metabolites. They're what are giving us those enzymes and your vitamins for human health. Right, we need the microbiology to then pass that through to the plant. So if we're having dramatic decreases like this, so that's magnesium and iron. You can go and look, and calcium. You can go and look at these for nickel, for zinc, for all those trace elements. These tables exist. Unfortunately, I haven't seen updated ones since 2001. Have you seen any updated ones? I would be scared, all right? Yeah. So it means part of what the story is happening in terms of obesity is that we have to eat, how many times? 8 times the amount of food to get the same nutrition. So Stephen was talking about that hidden hunger this morning. It was you, wasn't it? I made that up. Okay, so there's a hidden hunger, right? We're hungry for trace elements, so we keep eating. Those microbes are looking for stuff. They're trying to help your body get that nutrition. Another thing that's happening, and it's quite interesting research, they looked at the gut systems of Americans in 1940 and compared it to the gut microbes now. So in 1940, 96% of the American population had these types of gut microbes, and many of them are from soil. They went back and researched them recently, and only 6% of the American population had these specific gut microbes. What these gut microbes do is they tell you that you're full. So we don't have the gut microbes to tell us to switch off, and you go, nom, 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 nom. Just keep eating. Keep eating garbage, right? And it's part of the reason that we've got all that insect pressure out there. So insects don't have a pancreas, all right? They can't eat complete proteins. They can't eat complete sugars. They're after garbage. Right, so people are going, I've got more and more insect pressure. Well, you're growing worse and worse quality food. When I see an organic piece of fruit and it's got like insect damage and someone goes, it's just because it's organic. I'm like, no, it's because it's garbage and I don't want it. If an insect wants it, it's not for me. Right, we've got to look at how do we get that complete nutrition happening, and it's happening through biology. So some of the research that we've done, so this is American research. This was looking at a biological property and trace elements. This is organic, high forage, and this is grain-fed. So you see the grain-fed actually had more trace elements in it than the organic. Why? Yeah, it was a forage ration, perfect diet. Yeah, get all the trace elements or whatever you want. So they've got feed ration people actually working with them to get the trace elements. So the biological system, so this is just on grass, had nearly twice the amount of trace elements in it. Okay, we do this through building soil health. Right? We do this through feeding microbiology. In this one, it was looking at CLA. What's CLA? Who likes saying it? Yeah, I knew there'd be somebody who likes saying it. So conjugated linoleic acid, all right? So it's the fat-fighting fat. It's the fat that people are getting really, in the medical journals anyway, they're getting quite excited about it, okay? So it's part of your fatty acid profile, your omega-3 and omega-6s. How do we get CLA into the system? Well, you don't grain feed them for starters. And it's interesting, I work a lot in the US. I love the US, but I'm on operations that are running cattle out on grasslands, and then they finish them in feedlot. Or they run them in feedlot, they put them on the grass for 6 weeks and call it grass-fed. Grass-fed, okay? So you need to have some robustness to what it is that we're growing. And things like this make it really clear, right? So we can actually test the nutrient density of what we're producing. So the high forage organic's going to have more CLA because they're on grass, all right? They're not on the grain. So the minute you're on the grain, it starts to drop your conjugated linoleic acid. So there's nearly twice the amount on biological pastures. This research was done in New Zealand, and we were looking, what was interesting, so it's not just grain-fed, but we compared pastures where beef was under superphosphate treatments. Okay, so this is just standard conventional practices. The biological had nearly twice the amount of omega-3. We want to have omega-3 in the beef. I don't know if you guys are on Facebook, it's a dangerous place anyway, but the vegans are getting pretty loud about, how bad beef is and, about saturated fats and don't eat meat, it's really bad for your heart, blah, 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 right? What we need to be looking at is how do we get omega-3 back into that beef? It shouldn't be saturated fats. It shouldn't be low-quality meat. It's like that because we're feeding them low-quality feed. You are what you eat. Right? So if we can get nutrition back into the system, and these guys, they're biological, they still were only just in the beginning of their journeys as far as I was concerned. Right? So I'm working with a lot of beef producers now in New Zealand so we can have a certified beef product that we're putting into the supermarkets. It's got a little barcode, it says, you zip it and you can have a look at what are those farmers doing. They're doing some really, really cool stuff. And you only need a piece of meat that big, not like these giant, they keep selling Australian beef into New Zealand supermarkets. I don't know what that's about, but there's like these huge big steaks for like $9.99 compared to New Zealand ones are like $30. How does that work? Sorry. Anyway, so you only need a little steak and it's filling, all right? You don't need these great big grain-fed things. You can have these little steaks, right? And there's nutrition in the system. So how do we get from that fix-it mentality to actually having transformative, regenerative agriculture, right? And really, it's not, in this room, there'd be enough brains and intelligence to probably solve all the world's problems. I'm sure of it, right? It's not from a lack of intellect that we're getting ourselves into this situation. What I think it is, well, this is my thought anyway, is a lack of intuition, and it's a lack of actually listening to what our heart's saying, what our gut's saying, and actually listening to that part. Instead, we're all up in here. Sometimes I do think my body was just designed to walk my brain around. Okay, and that's what we're going to do. But there's something about, I don't know, as a woman, sometimes I feel like I can't speak up. Or I'm on farms and I see stuff and I think, that's not okay. And I in the past, have not spoken up. And I haven't spoken up because I think, I've got to be tough. I'm in the man's world. I can't be weak. You've got to be strong. You can't be worried about things like, it's not okay to hit that animal. It's not okay to do, you know what I mean. We see things sometimes and I don't say it. And so my new thing is actually, I'm going to say it. And I'm not going to say, oh, you're a bad person, or I'm not going to report you to the media. I'm just not going to be a participant in this. If we can just raise awareness to actually there's other ways that we can do things. And it's not easy, but it's okay. And I think what we're missing really is that feminine energy, that actually things are interconnected. Yeah, that we're all part of this, that it's okay to be, a woman in all of this. Instead of, no, we're just going to command and control and we're going to dictate and we're going to tell things how they're going to be. No, actually, this system is about how do we create soil situations that then enable soil health for a system to really start working, because that's working with biology, that's working with natural systems. And I'm not saying it's men and women. I'm saying it's a feminine energy, but it doesn't mean that it's not about men. Right? It's just that ability to be soft, to be able to see that bigger picture. And actually profitability is part of that too. It's not a bad word. It's how do we look after our families? How do we ensure that our farming families are going to be here 3 generations into the future? Because I see some farms and they're not going to be there. It's scary. Yeah, so how do we do that? Well, we look at how are we interconnected, not only as ourselves as farmers, but interconnected in our community and getting together and changing things. Because I think as globally, what we're seeing is that, well, this is an example, is one of the largest global movements. Over 2 million women walked on this last week. It's to stand up and say things, no, it's not okay, actually. And there's lots of really positive things that we can do. So this isn't about making things wrong, it's about transforming the face of agriculture. And how we do that is it's all about who we're being about this. So if we look at, like I use Greenpeace and I love what Greenpeace do, but it's just the flip side of the same problem. It's just the, no, we're not going to do that, knee-jerk, wrong-making, no, you can't, blah, blah, blah. It's actually not about the flip side of the coin. It's like what Einstein said about we're not going to solve these problems with the same sort of thinking that got us into this situation. We need to look past it. Like people say, what's your opinion on GE? I'm like, I don't have to have an opinion. It doesn't fit where I'm going. We're looking at how do we get these systems to work? How would it work in nature? How do we harness natural cycles? How do we harness carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, etc., etc.? So that's my invitation to you, is that actually we're not individual bacteria just bouncing around by ourselves. We are all interconnected in that sort of touchy-feely way. But, we're just on this one cell floating around in the middle of nowhere, really, all by ourselves. But actually together is where we make this difference. So it is the rural women's networks, it's having the willingness to get up in the pub and talk about what you're doing, because those are some of the biggest changes I see, is the people willing to make those comments in the pub and go, wow, you should, check it out. I didn't get any frost because I have biology, But but it's not, the scientific research that's looking at this is calling this postmodern agriculture, right? It's where we've got to go, and we've kind of got two directions to go. Make your choice. I know which way I'm going to go. So what I'm seeing in Canada is this is moving so fast, and it's the big cropping guys that are doing it because they're going, well, it makes financial sense. We need to be building our soil health. There's nothing, like they don't have any kind of woo-woo weird snake oil blah blah going on. They don't have that story. That's a cultural story that we've created in Australia and New Zealand. Right? We don't have to have that story. You don't have to feel ashamed like, oh, they might think I'm weird. You are weird. Everybody's weird. I'm weird. It's fine. All right, so I think that's my time. So I just want to thank everybody and thank you guys for having your vision of bringing us here together. So yeah, thank you.